My name is Wes Fryer, and I'm coming to you from Oklahoma City, where I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School and have been having quite the busy summer. Not quite the summer of professional travel that Dr. Neifer has been having. And you're looking quite festive today in the Hawaiian garb, I will say.
Thank you very much.
So I will send it up north to Jason, who is in Missoula, which I'm so happy you're not having a summer of fires, unlike Greece and other parts of the world that are just not doing very well with their fires.
Yes, thank you. The weather has been much better here, and we're always a little cautious up until the first or second week of September, where things start to die down a little bit. But there's been a couple of strikes that went out pretty quickly, and a little bit of haze a day or two. But we've been pretty lucky. I am Jason Neifer. I'm the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And this here is the EdTech Situation Room. It's episode 101. It is, I think you may have said this already, but I'm going to say it again, July 25th, 2018. And we did take last week off. Wes had a prior obligation, and I was in Orlando last week at fabulous Blackboard World, where a little brag, where my organization won the Blackboard Catalyst Award for teaching and learning, based on some designs we've been working on in the last couple of years. And we don't talk a whole lot about online learning on this podcast, but at some point I would love to kind of have a conversation about one of the things that's really changed our organization is really looking at taking, it doesn't really matter what learning management system you use, Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, Schoology is becoming a popular choice for a lot of distance learning programs, but it really pays when you spend time figuring out what learning management you can do with your learning management system. So taking all the bells and whistles and gizmos that come with that system and doing cool things with it. So it's nice to get that information acknowledged. So there's been a lot going on the last couple of weeks, and part of it because so much goes on with this stuff. Part of it is it's hard to know if we've talked about some of these pieces or not, or maybe alluded to them in the past. But Wes, where would you like to start this evening?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. Gosh, I should have picked this up. Well, let's start with kind of an outlier article that I think I've been holding on to for a little while. This is Rushkoff, Douglas Rushkoff, who wrote a great book, Program or Be Programmed, and is definitely far left of center on the political spectrum. But he posted to his Medium channel a very interesting article called Survival of the Richest. The wealthy are plotting to leave us behind. And it's pretty dystopian in terms of, he got hired by this really wealthy bunch of I guess billionaires and investors to talk to him about AI and the future and employment and what they need to do to prepare for the future when the have-nots far outnumber the haves, and it's just a real ugly scenario in terms of the way that automation what it's done to employment and to society. So yeah, I'm not going to say that I definitely buy all of that, but have your views changed at all, Jason, in terms of your perspectives on technology and our trajectory? I mean, I've tended to be very positive, and I think we'll talk a little bit. I'll get into the show notes, a great video lecture that I watched this last week by I'll pull it up. We'll recognize the name, but anyway, it's just talking about the ways in which well, I guess this is the tweeted, or this is the pinned tweet on my profile right now. So this is Zephoria on Twitter, who is Dana Boyd, very noted academic and as established and credentialed as you can possibly be in the world of academia, as far as her master's at Harvard and her PhD at Berkeley. I titled my post that I wrote about this, Understanding the Weaponization of News Media. But I don't know. It's just, are you as optimistic as you were 10 years ago about technology? I'll just ask it that way.
Well, and it touches on a topic we go back to quite frequently, right? Like, obviously Wes and I are both very big technology advocates, and we feel the power of technology ourselves, and we've seen what technology can do in the hands of students and teachers. So that brings a very positive notion to it. But I mean, it's pretty hard in 2018 not to feel like we may be headed down a road that, if we're not extremely cautious about, could turn into some sort of dystopian future. And and we're not a politics podcast, but obviously the 2016 election did spark some concerns related to the news media and broadly social media as it impacts elections. And in fact, one of the stories that I'm going to point to today is the one that kind of bounced around the kind of nerdy media of the last 2 weeks, is the notion that apparently a number of voting machines made by a major manufacturer shipped to states ended up having a very easily accessible backdoor and a network protocol that allowed it to be easily opened up to interference by outside actors. And of course, everyone thinks of Russian hackers at this point as outside actors of the election. But I think if we don't have these conversations, we're inevitable to face the worst possible future in regards to these particular technological advances. And we've talked a lot in the past, and I could see where someone might perceive that when we talk about things like universal basic income or the changes in labor or the challenge of robotics, as being maybe not applicable to the core of our topic, which is educational technology. But all these things matter together, right? Like, there is a bigger picture here than just using technology to empower students in the classroom. We owe it to ourselves and to our students to spend some time thinking about if technology is the right tool for the job, if for no other reason that introducing a technology that could down the road turn into something dangerous or dystopian or even apocalyptic. And I realize those terms are dramatic in their interpretation. That I think it's a real thing, right? And we have to be extremely cautious about that. And even if you want a little piece of it, right, all this talk about digital distraction right now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we need to think about it in terms of a counterbalance that, as technology can empower, technology can do many other things that are not as positive. And so, we have to be conscious.
I'm really thinking about this for digital citizenship. One of the things week after next I'm looking forward to is a video conference with Susan Bearden. One of our book reads for our school this summer has been Susan's book on digital citizenship, a community approach. It's a very short book, very fast read. But thinking about the degree to which the things that Dana Boyd, and I may even break down this video because I think it's interesting. I won't forecast your Geek of the Week, but your Geek of the Week is a website that really does break a lot of news today, and it's also influential in terms of the ways in which folks can go down rabbit holes. And she talks about 4chan and the ways that Twitter has been weaponized by extremist groups, as she'll say, in some cases for the lols, the LOLs. But there's really a series of different events. Pizzagate is one of them that happened during the 2016 election. Or I don't know how many people are putting the pieces together, and it really has to do with the ways in which well, it's not in this case, it's not Silicon Valley setting the agenda, but folks with access to technology really are able to direct the attention of the world and mainstream media to things that they want to have. And anyway, two other things that I've been listening to lately. The latest Twit podcast has a great conversation about this. And I how shocking is it to, I guess they call it, the old capital, it's old media, but it's old industrialists in terms of the Trump presidency and the ways in which Twitter is being leveraged and the ways in which, Facebook as well. I mean, these media platforms have become visibly more influential than they ever have before. And so I think it's important for us to not only understand, for instance, what has transcribed in the 2016 election, But this evolution you've talked about, I think the correction that we're seeing now multiple times on the show, and I totally agree with that, because we're having this perception that companies and social media have been able to develop unregulated for so long, and that relatively white male homogeneous groups, not completely but generally of individuals, have developed technologies perhaps without an eye to the ethics and to the implications, the impacts on society, the impacts on democracy. So one other link that I dropped in after your motherboard article that you mentioned about the voting machines, because this brings us to the midterm elections in 2018. It brings us to democracy. It brings us to a lot of really important societal things. And I think that this isn't fringe conversation. I mean, we're not just talking about stuff that, just the geeks at your school or whatever need to talk about, like grappling with the ways in which social media has really changed the landscape of democracy and of discourse. Those should be mainstream conversations today. This is an article which I'll admit to you I have not completely gotten through. I was just actually reading this last night, but this is Wired from June 20th. And the title is How an Entire Nation Became Russia's Test Lab for Cyber War. And this one is really delving into the Ukraine and the ways in which Russia has been at all-out war with the Ukraine, and they've been able to actually take down the power grid several times. And so sometimes on the show we end up, having this sort of Chicken Little, perhaps, meme that's going here, about wondering about where all this is going. But wow, do we ever need to have white hat hackers and a variety of different folks engaged in the creation of code, the shaping of of social media technologies, and then being able to also think about truth and critical thinking and vetting, who do you believe and how do you determine that, and authority and all kinds of things. And this is it's an alarming article, but I think I need, and maybe I'll just do this for fun, thinking about Stuxnet and how important that was as far as that cyber weapon that was used against Iran, to spin up the centrifuges and the way in which that then became released. There's different things that have happened relatively recently in technology, in the technology world, as it relates to hacking and as it relates to social media. The one thing that I guess was mentioned a lot by Dana Boyd in that video was the ways in which people can go down rabbit holes and be radicalized in their political views. It just makes me wonder, how kids are grappling with that, how families are grappling with it, because it is a really different world. And it's not just like, oh, there's porn, kids can fall into that pit. There's, really, really right-wing, racist stuff. I think we've probably mentioned on the podcast the series Caliphate. Have we talked about that? Mentioned Caliphate?
I believe we have, yeah. Okay.
I don't know if I'd had that as a Geek of the Week, but oh my gosh, in terms of radicalization and insight into the war in Syria. But, these are all really big kinds of issues. So anyway, been doing some reading and thinking about that. And I would say I am certainly, optimistic about the positive power of technology to be used, constructively. I guess these are just stories that verify the power of these tools and the importance of us in school, addressing them and helping students have that conversation about not just appropriate use and responsible use, but about citizenship and the ways that those are being used. Because it's just, it's like there's never been a better day to be an educational technologist, to be somebody involved in helping other teachers and students use these technologies, and the seriousness of the issues. I mean, at one point it was like, are you blending your class? Are you have an online component? I mean, I don't know. I just think the levity and seriousness of these kinds of issues that are being brought up and that we're seeing in mainstream media, it's much less fringe, and perhaps that's why we're situating it in the digital citizenship context. It's conversations that everybody needs to have. So
Right.
Where would you like to take it? Well, no, go ahead.
Well, and this may be one last comment about this. I think if you're not at least in a minor way struggling with this, then to be quite frank, I think you need to start to a little bit. And we're not the only geeks that are having, some second thoughts are not the word. We're just struggling a little bit with this stuff, right? Like my wife has not left Facebook completely, but has created a kind of a clever strategy for preventing herself from getting on, which is that she only goes on via either a desktop or a mobile browser, and has uninstalled the app, and she's created a wickedly long password that's difficult to type in. So she gets on every week or so, maybe a little bit more, sees the stuff like pictures of her friends as kids and pictures of people on vacation and hiking and thumbs up, et cetera, et cetera. And the super bottom line is that she's is taking that action there, right? And I think that's an example of where we have to start having some philosophical questions about how all this matters. I bristle a little bit when I talk about my program, which is a distance learning program, where people say things like this is the future of education. I don't think it is. I think the future of education is I think it's maybe more personalized, and it's more direct one-to-one, and technology will almost certainly be a part of it, but I don't want kids sitting in their home taking online courses as the only option. I think it's one of many great options that are available, but I don't think it's going to replace a classroom or replace a school or replace a district or replace schooling in general. I think it's one of many interesting options that can best serve the needs of individual students. And so, I am very interested in thinking about, how the future goes and how those pieces work. But it's really important that we have these philosophical conversations, because it's a big piece of what we do and how we get along in these vast processes. So
shout out to Peggy George, who's joining us live in our chat room. Peggy, we're so glad that you're back with us. And we do want to let everyone know our links are available on edtechsr.com/links. There is a Google Doc there that has far more links than we will have time to talk about. Where would you like to take us next, Dr. Neifert?
Let's do some of the geeky stuff, because I think that might get us back to talking about things that are not depressing.
The news, yeah.
So first let's talk about some Apple stuff. So I know there's an article about iOS that you put in, Wes. I want to talk, like maybe this week in Apple hand wringing, but so a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not sure if we talked about this or not, Apple announced a big hardware refresh in its MacBook Pro line, and suddenly all these new, very advanced processors and fast RAM is available in that line. And I think one of the things Apple is struggling with right now is obviously they're knocking consumer devices out of the park, right? Because iPads and iPhones are a dominant force in particularly the United States market, but also in a worldwide market. But it seems like their traditional products, which will include desktop and laptop computers, aren't getting the attention that I think some of the super Apple fans think they deserve. And so, interestingly enough, one of the MacBook Pros that was released had an i9 chip in it. And for those of you that don't keep up with Intel's nomenclature for chips, i3, i5, i7 have been the levels of chips available for the last 9 or so years. And the i7 was its fastest chip, generally for power users. i5 was kind of the average chip, the middle ground chip, and then i3 were generally in consumer level devices. Well, there's a new MacBook Pro that has an i9 chip in it, which is an incredibly fast chip, very, 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 very speedy chip. And yet Apple put it into a laptop that is not designed for the i9 chip, or at least it appears so. And because the more modern chips tend to throttle their speed when they get too hot, this chip ends up slowing down to where it's not noticeable at all. The chip is the chip is super fast. And so I think I keep waiting for Apple to. I know they've noticed this. They're not ignorant that they're not noticing I think the discontent amongst their community. But it feels like yet another misstep on the part of Apple to take care of the pro users that I think they very much need. There's actually a YouTube channel that, now that I think about it, I'm going to throw in there, where I've been watching lately, where a gentleman's takes a lot of older Macs and talks about whether or not they'd be useful in a new context. And more often often than not they are. But one of the things that he talks about is that, modern Macs are very expensive and they are very high-end pieces of hardware, but it doesn't seem like that investing a lot of money in a modern Mac laptop is worth it for a lot of average users. So, Wes, what does your daily carry Mac look like for you right now?
It's 11-inch MacBook. So we're still, for teachers, MacBook Air. That's, and we talked about that on the show. We're going to approach another refresh cycle, hopefully in October, right? Because that's when Apple is rumored to come out with other new devices, which could be some kind of new device. Will they maintain the Air? What will they do? That's my daily carry. I have considered perhaps moving to a Chromebook in terms of, proof of capability. In a past life when I was in Texas, this was back in the 90s. I don't know. I learned a lesson about, how important it is to make sure teachers are not slighted in terms of the kinds of technologies that are purchased for them,
right? And
just not cut, and it influences me today as we look at devices. And it's frankly an easier way out to just say, well, let's just go ahead and stick with the MacBook Air, especially one of our divisions that we're going to be refreshing this year. It's our primary. Our pre-K and our K teachers, they really don't use projection. A Chromebook would be fantastic, but and this remains to be seen, and it's not all my decision how all of it plays out. But my recommendation at this point is going to be to stick with the MacBook. We don't want them to feel slighted, as teachers, because everyone else has that MacBook. But I laugh because it's the same conversation that kids are having with their parents, and parents are coming to me frequently. Hey, what should I get? What do you recommend? And I'll generally say, what are you doing? Okay, a Chromebook will do all of that, right? Unless you're doing real heavy video editing or you're going to be doing, engineering. I mean, even our son, who's, going to be a junior this year at Colorado School of Mines and Mechanical Engineering, I mean, he's got a MacBook Pro and he can dual boot into Windows to run, the design programs, SolidWorks that he needs to run. Anyway, everybody wants a MacBook, or not everybody, but a lot of people do. Does everyone need it? No, not so much. The Chromebook is definitely an incredibly powerful. I will reference that other Mac article in that series. Apple releases iOS 11.4.1 with USB restricted mode. We've talked quite a bit on the show about privacy. My 8-month affair, we'll just put it that way, with Android. I'm back to an iPhone with an Apple 6 Plus. But anyway, those were concerns about the ways in which customs officials and others can take a phone like an iPhone and rapidly, suck all the data off of it. And once that data has been acquired by Egyptian authorities, U.S. authorities, whoever, it's there in the virtual ether of the cloud to be hacked and grabbed by whoever. So glad to see Apple doing this. USB restricted mode means that if you have not, I think it's like 15 minutes, if you haven't had your Mac if it's been more than an hour since your iPhone was unlocked, then the iPhone will actually not allow, supposedly, a USB accessory to just plug into it and suck all the data off of it. Now, I'm sure there's hackers that are going to be addressing this, but I'm glad for this. I received a phone call a few weeks ago from one of our area tech directors in one of the larger urban districts who had some board members traveling to China and were concerned about these kinds of issues. And so I was talking to him about Chromebooks and also about Android and about, things that they might want to do as far as profiles and data and stuff like that to delete. You can get too, carried away with your paranoia about all this. But at the same time, these things are happening at the border in terms of stuff being seized. So I'm excited to see what Apple is going to come out with in October. The rumor sites I've been reading seem to indicate a fairly significant update, for their laptop line. Of course, what I'm really holding out for is that rumored hinge. It's not actually rumored. I mean, they have a patent on a hinge that looks a lot like the Microsoft Surface Book. And so, if Apple could pull off some kind of touch laptop that is either an iPad hybrid or integrates touch, then that would be pretty interesting. On Saturday, I was able to do a short workshop on literacy apps for the Chromebook for a wonderful local group called WizKids, and they're a tutoring group predominantly in our lower socioeconomic schools. A donor had purchased 200 new Samsung Chromebooks, which are the flip over, I guess, yoga. I don't know if that is the yoga model, but it's the USB-C only model. And so anyway, I was playing with those and showing folks, different literacy apps to use. And that definitely feels like a laptop of the future, right? I mean, no standard USB port, USB-C only for charging and for peripherals, but being able to flip over and go to town, touching your screen. I can touch the screen all I want, but it's a laptop, so.
Well, and I'm still surprised that Mac has been so slow to respond to the touch movement, and I don't particularly, I can certainly use a laptop without touch, but now that both the Windows laptop I have access to and the Chromebook I have access to have touch, I do miss it when it's gone, and my guess is that as mobile devices become the dominant a place where people engage with technology, that's just going to train us to need or demand touch as an interface. So let's talk some Google stuff. Big news last week was that the EU has fined Google $5 billion for antitrust violations, and what I'm sure is a familiar refrain from 20 years ago when Microsoft was fined somewhat similar amounts of money, at least in terms of inflation, for bundling things with Windows or forcing things onto Windows. Google was fined for the same thing. In essence, the complaint says that Google only allows you to use Android with the Google Play Store only if you bundle within a certain list of applications. So if Android is open source software, so you can go download it and do whatever you want to with it. In fact, there's a number of interesting projects and services that utilize, or hardware platforms that utilize Android. You wouldn't recognize it because it's not for a phone or laptop or tablet. It's instead for something, right? An Internet of Things device or a technology device that's not immediately, doesn't scream cell phone, but that if you want to put it on a phone, then you have to also put Gmail on there. You need to also put the other mandatory Google apps, and those have to be must install applications that can't be uninstalled. And the EU says that is an antitrust violation and worthy of $5 billion in fines. Now, interestingly, Google has not really faced much scrutiny from this, at least from investors. Their company actually increased in stock price in the last couple of weeks, despite that announcement. And Google itself, through Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google and leader, Android or Google, I think it is Google, says that he believes, and I think there's some credibility to this argument, that Android has brought a lot of diversity to the cell phone market because you can buy incredibly high-end cell phones with Android on it. You can buy literally $25 cell phones with Android on it, and obviously those are vastly different experiences, but the marketplace is pretty diverse. So Wes, I know you've moved back to the iPhone platform. But I think we can both agree that iOS is a better platform because it has a competitor, right? Like they both push each other very aggressively, and so I'm disappointed that the EU has gone in this direction because I think that Google has done a lot of good here in regards to cell phone platforms, but at the same time, I think we have to be conscious that, there are only two, viable platforms here. Microsoft has not really worked out, and Tizen is Samsung's platform for cell phones, and that's gone nowhere, right? There's a handful of Tizen devices in Asia that are popular. But any thoughts related to the antitrust piece?
Did we talk about the settlement with Samsung and Apple? I don't know if we ever mentioned that on the show.
Yeah, I think we might put a link in, but I think we got to it.
That was a pretty significant thing that finally drew to a close. Steve Jobs had sworn at one point he would, spend Apple's last penny to destroy Samsung for the ways in which they ripped off multi-touch and the iPhone. And so eventually, as often happens with litigious anger, the lawyers were the big winners, and folks ended up settling. And so all of that has come to a close between Samsung and Apple. But this is, I think, somewhat related. I totally agree as far as the benefits of having competition. We've talked about phones and, T-Mobile, versus AT&T and all of that. So it's really interesting to me that Europe is leading the charge of the correction. And I don't know whether this fits into a tech correction as well. I think there's danger in Google and some other companies getting looped, or getting, even in the perception of U.S. voters, taxpayers, et cetera, Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, all of that, that a lot of anger against maybe tech companies and their power and their influence kind of gets rolled all together. So anyway, the EU is definitely being more aggressive at this point with financial penalties, and then also with the GDPR, the general regulation on privacy. I'm not getting that exactly right, but anyway, the privacy legislation in Europe and the ways in which that we'll see how that is enforced. It's incredible to see how much money Google spends on lobbying, right? I mean, they have in the U.S., and then I'm sure that's occurring other places. It's going to be important that folks don't break the internet, right? GDPR and some of these other things that are saying, hey, you've got to have all the data here, in our country. Or I think it's more saying you've got to document exactly where, but maybe you have to give options, for people to delete. But I mean, the internet's built on this idea of free and open sharing. And so anyway, there's all kinds of unexpected conversations and consequences to what has been unleashed with respect to the internet. So I hope that amidst all of this, we're going to maintain competition and consumer choice. And we're also going to continue to be advocates for sharing and the positive and constructive uses of all these technologies, because they are incredible, even though, unfortunately, we sometimes have our attention, and even on this show, perhaps, on some of those more negative uses.
Yep. And then a couple other interesting things. First, YouTube. There's a new version of YouTube that's running around, and apparently it's and I'm not sure if it's widely implemented yet, but basically, it's much faster than previous versions of YouTube, but only if you are on a Chrome browser, because it utilizes a specialized some kind of call in the Chrome browser that makes it pretty fast on Chrome and not as fast on others. But I posted a quick link there from The Verge from today, where you can actually tweak other browsers to make YouTube faster in Chrome. So, like, a little nerdy hint. But the one other thing I thought might be kind of interesting to talk about is that the Chromecast, which is Google's Android-based device for plugging into televisions to stream video and audio, it is 5 years old today. And the reason why it caught my attention, other than I am a pretty prolific Chromecast user, is that there was a lot of discussion amongst the kind of technology discussion boards and blogs about how, although Chromecast is a very popular platform, that it seems to be fairly stagnant in development. There's just been 2 editions of it hardware-wise, and not much more update than that, and that a lot of people still find it to be somewhat difficult to use, even though it is in many ways a vastly superior product over Bluetooth, including the ability to send video first, and then secondarily, it really decreases the battery use of your mobile device when you're casting something, is the nomenclature for that term, to a television or a music device. So, Wes, are you still a Chromecast guy in your home, or are you still using Apple TVs? Where are you at right now with that?
Well, we definitely still have one, and periodically I'll turn it on, literally as just a screensaver on one of our TVs. We're primarily Apple TV, so that is where we're consuming our media. I still haven't seen Chromecast come to the enterprise in terms of enterprise management at school. In fact, the best suggestion, shout out to Vanessa Perez, one of our Oklahoma librarians that's out in Clinton. What she did down in Lawton, I think they do in Clinton, when they want to wirelessly connect a Chromebook, is they just plug one into the HDMI port, and they use, I don't remember if it was Belkin or what it was a wireless keyboard, actually, that has a little trackpad on it, and they can just pass that around the room to different students. And so with a little, USB dongle plugged into that Chromebook that's hardwired, the keyboard moves around wirelessly in the room, and, students are able to bring up whatever they want on the Chromebook. I thought that was pretty genius, and we actually may pilot that technique at our school. So yeah, I haven't done a ton of additional experimenting because we're just pretty happy with the Apple TVs. I'm continuing to use YouTube all the time on the Apple TV. In fact, staying up on Hawaii and just what's going on with the volcanoes there. The volume of lava that is coming out of the earth, in Hawaii is just astounding. And anyway, YouTube is my source for that. And a lot of times when I'm just wanting to get, watch some YouTube, I'm doing on Apple TV. I want to pull up two related articles to topics you were just touching on. Number one was fines coming from the European Union. So this is a Time article from July 11th. Facebook is facing its first fine over the Cambridge Analytica privacy scandal. Interesting that this is coming from London. A UK government office that investigated the Cambridge Analytica scandal announced its intention to fine Facebook £5,000, which is about $663,000 for failing to safeguard that information. And of course, this is facing its first fine. So the fine itself has not been put out. There's a lawsuit that's been filed. But I think we're probably going to continue to see this. Of course, that always happens in the world of litigation. Those that want money find those that have lots of money, and they file court cases. But anyway, that was kind of along those same lines. And then the other related article, and this is, I don't know, this is actually a security article. So I guess this will take us a little bit of a different direction in terms of mentioning security. But I've been listening to the Twit podcast today, and they had mentioned this article. This was Tom's Hardware on July 19th, 2018. Backdoors keep appearing in Cisco's routers. It relates to some of what we've talked about as far as that iOS article that Apple is giving users some more privacy control over their devices so that, a security entity, customs or whatever, won't just be able to suck data off your device. This is like the fifth backdoor that Cisco has found and that has been found in their routers. And this is really just stunning. In the Twit podcast, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. They say, Cisco, like many huge companies, is actually lots of companies together. And so I guess the business unit where these backdoors have been, quote, discovered that's the same unit that's been having them. So anyway, this whole idea of whether or not backdoors should be there, this is stuff that's actually, I think put into, well, it's hardware as well as software. But anyway, that's a big issue that continues to be debated. There are folks that think we really need to have those backdoors available so that, entities like security services and others need to be able to, get in and see things and do things. But once the backdoor exists, it's open for all kinds of folks to use. So that therein lies the dilemma.
Absolutely. And then a couple quick Microsoft things. First and foremost, and I actually think this would be a relatively compelling product, maybe not for me, but for a lot of teachers that are in districts that have gone all in on Office 365. But it's hard to tell if this is real or not, and there's been some conflicting information to say whether this is true. But apparently there is a suspicion that sometime soon, based on a confirmation from a Microsoft Store employee online, that there would be a Microsoft phone soon, not a Microsoft OS phone, which is what they've stopped developing the Microsoft Phone OS and have really abandoned that platform. But instead, the phone would be Android, but heavily overlaid with Microsoft apps and Microsoft services. And the reason why I find that to be somewhat of a compelling piece is that I did earlier this year, and I believe I talked about it here on the podcast, I did take a spare phone and started over from scratch and did exactly what this phone purports to do. I installed a number of Microsoft apps. I made them the default. So the Mail app was the default Mail app. Cortana was the default voice assistant. The default browser was the mobile Edge browser, and it became a fairly functional Microsoft phone, well integrated into my, personal Microsoft base account. And one of the things that my kind of partner in crime for PD and I, Mike Agnelli, talk about all the time is that, in a lot of cases, your district is going to make a decision for you of whether you're going to be a Google school, you're going to be a Microsoft school, and you may be able to lobby to go in one direction or the other, or you may be able to help make that decision. But if your district has made that decision for you, there are plenty of ways to figure out how to make those platforms work for you in a way that you can be very productive, even if you prefer the other platform. And in fact, I work on projects now with folks that are all in on Office 365. And if you get the apps downloaded and get a kind of a functional workflow for it, it works just fine. And so it's a pretty quality scenario. So I would be very excited if Microsoft decided to go in this direction, because I think that's a really cool use of Android to kind of create a Microsoft phone. And I'm going to go ahead and guess, Wes, that doesn't particularly, that wouldn't like to bring you back to the Android architecture.
Well, okay, to be fair, and that's a good thing to talk about. I mean, I had one of the lowest end new Android phones that you could get, right? It was $140. So to be fair, I really need to evaluate, and I certainly still hopefully will evaluate a much more modern, well, not modern, it's modern, but just a higher end Android phone. So a Pixel phone, for instance, or a Samsung Galaxy phone, even if it was one or two back. The Pixels, I think we're seeing them around maybe $200 or $300 as far as the Pixel ones. And I had wondered about that. So I definitely have made this shift to, I don't need to spend, $1,000 or whatever, the top dollar is on the top phone. I mean, it's just that's really chasing vanity more than it's chasing function in terms of what you need. But and so that's good news. So hey, when 5G comes here and kids are able to download multi-gigabit or gigabyte DVD size files in 5 to 10 seconds or somewhere in that ballpark, that's really going to be crazy, because we have reached inflection point. We're reaching the inflection point, the tipping point. I mean, when you look at what's happening with, oh gosh, my brain is being slowly. I'm just getting older. What's the game that everyone's playing now that's taking the world by storm? I haven't played it yet.
Oh my goodness! How do I not think of this? Because I had a kid playing it every day here for.
All right, Peggy. Here's your chat room test. I'll just Google game taking over the world. It's going to be Fortnite. Thank you. So thank you, Google. Out of 4.1 billion results, Googling game taking over the world is News Hub. Fortnite video game taking over the world. Okay, so Fortnite is this game that so many kids are playing, and it's a free game, but they've made so much money because you can do all these add-ons and things to, I guess, your clothing and how you look and appear.
Right.
The capability of the smartphone, that is a huge part of the Fortnite phenomenon, is the fact that so many, teens and tweens are carrying around in their pockets, and, older folks, just startlingly powerful computers that have tons of power as far as graphics and what they can do. So anyway, I need to give a higher end Android. Yes, Peggy did. She came up with Fortnite, but yeah, we had a race there.
And then one other big or interesting piece of Microsoft news is that Microsoft Teams, which is their collaboration platform, I don't really know how to describe it, because it's part of the it's kind of their version of Google Classroom, sort of. But I've used it in context of the work I do with NCCE, but as just a chat platform, it's kind of like Slack. And I'll admit, I'm not sure how I missed this, but the Slack revolution kind of missed me. Like I never really jumped on many Slacks, and I know a lot of people that spend a lot of time on Slack and in really vibrant communities. There's a big Slack in the classroom movement and that sort of thing. But Microsoft had released this Microsoft Teams app last year that was available through Office 365 and especially the campus editions of that, and so it became kind of the de facto Microsoft Classroom. But there's now a free version of that software, and the idea here is it's going to try to go head to head with Slack, but it has all the integrations into the Microsoft tools. And so if you are looking for a collaborative piece of software, and again, when I do work with, there's 2 or 3 teams that I am on a Microsoft team account on that I've worked on with projects, and it's pretty solid. And I have to to say, Google's answer to that, which is Hangouts chat, is what I use now to collaborate with my team at work, but it's just not quite as functional as either Teams or Slack.
And Google remains somewhat fractured today with regard to messaging, and we're probably going to see something dropped and something emphasized. I think, and I don't use Skype nearly as much. Peggy and I and others were on Skype all the time with K-12 Online for a decade. I've heard and read folks say that they really don't think Microsoft has been paying much attention to the regular, consumer base. They've really gone for enterprise customers. And so Skype isn't what it used to be for individuals. Google is fractured with a couple different messaging platforms. In addition to Google Hangouts, you'll have to help me, Jason. What are the other Android messaging? There's a cross-platform one.
There's Duo is one of them.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like I'm a big Google Android guy, and I don't use any of those, right? Like, I mean, I use Hangouts because that's my work chat and my my work video conferencing solution, and obviously we use Hangouts to record this podcast. One of the biggest mistakes Google's made was when they originally released Hangouts as just a video interactivity platform, making that like a necessary Google Plus part, when it was quite obvious almost immediately that Google Plus was not going to take off as a social network. They should have immediately unbundled that. And I think Hangouts is amazing, right? Like they're compared to other, I'm on a campus that has a campus-wide a license to Zoom available, and we've previously in my organization licensed GoToMeeting, which was a nice effective platform. But Hangouts is as good as those, and it's free. But I think they've lost a lot of opportunity to basically dominate the video chat market by making that a Google Plus only for its first couple of years.
And I'll share, before a quick Microsoft Store story, a shout out to Cheryl Oakes and the Webheads and Alice Barr. I mean, it was just not very many years ago when, in order to do this kind of live webcast, and of course, this is the maturity of the web, it really took a lot of technical savvy with different programs. And what was it called? It wasn't SoundCloud. It was Soundflower, that would take audio from, one channel and create another one. And in order, it's just like the magic, recipe that you had to have in order to do a live webcast. So the fact that we can just, open up our laptops, I can ask my wife to stop streaming Netflix and we've got, our bandwidth is good. And here we go. It's a show, it's recorded. We download the video, put it online. It's phenomenal. I mean, that kind of capability. So I would expect Google to continue to maintain the Hangouts platform, because there are so many gamers and others that, rely on that. I mean, they're growing out Twitch, right? Which I think, didn't Google buy Twitch?
Amazon bought Twitch.
Oh, Amazon bought Twitch. Okay. So competing platforms there. But yeah, the world of gaming and, watching gaming for entertainment and all that stuff is continuing to grow. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in terms of consolidating perhaps some of their messaging platforms. I'll tell a quick Microsoft story since we were talking Microsoft a little bit. I was at the Microsoft store, which we have here in Oklahoma City, as well as an Apple store, a couple times this month. And we have a new communications director that really wants a Surface Pro. So getting you some information about that, and then getting another Surface repaired. And they're about to have next week, I won't be able to attend a Windows Go, am I saying that right, device rollout, because these are the first Windows S laptops that they really think are the Chromebook competitors. So right. the folks there were talking that up, and I was like, show it to me, show me how easy it is to manage it. If it's as easy or easier than the Google Admin Console and Chromebooks, then perhaps. But Microsoft has a long way to go. Google is so far ahead, and there's a tendency in IT for schools and others in the enterprise to really weigh heavily when you make those decisions that you were mentioning, the decisions made for you, to look at management. I'm excited about the improvements that have been made with the iPad, particularly excited about the price coming down and the functionality with the pencil, and et cetera. And so we're continuing to go down the road of multiple devices at school, certainly. But we'll see what Microsoft has to show off with these Windows Go devices. I mean, they're continuing to iterate, but hey, that's how creativity, eventually does work.
Very true.
Be pretty interesting to see what Apple's going to come out with in October. Apple has that capability to set the standard for the industry with something amazing and new, an entirely new, device line or whatever, which I'm not saying they're going to do that, but I kind of think Apple is going to be following the market. And that's why, as we've talked about Chrome and Chromebooks and, tablets that fold over and convertibles, yogas, all of that with touch. I'm becoming increasingly convinced that's the device of the future. It may or may not have a detachable actual screen, but being able to touch the device, draw on the device. We have these Lenovo Chromebooks that we refreshed a couple carts with this summer, and this will be the first time to roll them out. That any number 2 pencil with graphite pencil is the stylus. So no need to buy an $89 educationally discounted Apple Pencil. Here's your number 2 pencil. Start doing your math problem with
so
your
interesting
stylus on the Chromebook. So it's good. That I'm really excited to see how that is utilized. Where else would we like to go before Geeks of the Week? We've got a little bit more time.
One just interesting article. This is from Paul Thurrott's site, Thurrott.com, and it does inspire, I think, an interesting question about the future. Like there's been a lot of talk the last couple of years about the fact that PC sales, and by PC sales I mean laptops, desktops, right? It's been dramatically decreasing over the past 6 years. And so the article talks about how there was a very ever so slight tick upwards in PC sales in the second quarter of 2018. And the reason why I mention that is because I think there's a couple things behind that, but I'm a big fan of mobile computing, obviously, although I will tell you that I don't use a tablet almost ever anymore. It's basically my cell phone, my laptop, and then when I'm able to sit at a desk, a desktop computer. But there may be some, redirection part of that. And I think part of it's because for the longest time, 6-7-year-old PCs were probably good enough in a lot of cases, including Macs for that matter, that the hardware lasted quite a long time, where new computers are that much better than 5 or 6-year-old computers now, both in battery life, size, portability, resolution, and screen, and that could be part of the piece. But we talk a lot about how mobile computing is taking over, but there is some small signs of life in the computer realm. And what I didn't look, I was going to look a little more deeply to find out if Chromebooks were considered to be part of. I'm certain they are, because I don't consider them to be mobile devices in the ilk of a phone or a tablet. But I thought that was an interesting piece of factoid, that there seems to be at least a steadying out of sales.
Peggy has dropped a couple of good links into our chat room, and one of those is actually a Diane Ravitch article about these making guns at home on the 3D printer. I think those were some articles I didn't get moved over, and we may even want to talk about that in the next show. Boy, it's huge. There's a settlement for a court case, because we haven't talked about that on the show, have we? I don't think we haven't had a show for so long. So yeah. Anyway, we'll put it on and we can talk about it more. But there's a settlement. The guy who put the first recipe for a 3D printer in order to print a gun has settled with the federal government, and he's really a very fringe gun rights guy. But anyway, it's fascinating. So I'll drop that article in for us to read up a little bit more on and talk about. Because what it does is it combined the First Amendment for free speech with the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and it says code is speech. And so it's fascinating. I don't know, have the fancy words. It portends very dramatic things, for the United States, when anybody who wants to is going to be able to download these instructions and print a gun. And it's not from your typical, plastic ABS, 3D printers. There's milling machines and more advanced 3D printers. But anyway, Diane Ravitch had a post about that. Let's see. Let's mention one more article. This is in Gadget from July 23rd. I thought this was fascinating. DARPA pushes for AI that can explain its decisions. Talk a lot on the show about AI, machine learning, the way in which Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, has talked about, the AI first focus of Google, and the way that we're seeing this race play out between Apple and Google particularly, but also Amazon and Microsoft for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so one of the challenges with machine learning is that you could end up with an algorithm that is created essentially inside a black box where you've put inputs in and you've trained this device to be able to have a particular outcome, but you don't really understand how it's working and what it's doing because the code that it writes, which is what machine learning is able to do, isn't certainly commented and explained in a human, in a way that's going to, take the programmer in mind and say, hey, the next person who opens this code and views it, they can view my commented code and be able to see how this is structured and understand it. It could be very unintelligible. And so DARPA has some projects, DARPA being the Defense Advanced Research Agency of the U.S. Department of Defense, is putting out some projects on really kind of a shorter turnaround than they sometimes do for their other projects. And they're wanting artificial intelligence tools to be developed that really give insight into how they are doing what they're doing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And again, we've had some books recommended in the past, for Geeks of the Week about DARPA and things like that. It's consider that we as consumers are about 10 to 20 years behind where the Department of Defense and DARPA is today with their technology. So if they were able to talk on the record unclassified, then I'm sure it would be an even more Ian Jukes. Can you believe it? It's so amazing. Look what's happening to the world type of experience. So, wow, 116 degrees in Phoenix today. What was the temperature today in Missoula, Jason?
94, I think, although it was a nice dry hot. So
yeah, it's been low 90s here as well. Well, we are at the top of the hour. It is time for the Geek of the Week. I'm going to actually share Peggy George's Geek of the Week first, and she's dropped into the chat room. This is a screencasting tool. By the way, if you don't follow Peggy George, P. George on Twitter, you need to follow her because she is very connected with all kinds of online professional development happening. And also amazing tools like this. So this is Loom. The website is useloom.com, and it says send a video, not 1,000 words. It's a screencasting tool that works in the Chrome browser as a Chrome extension and lets you screencast your full desktop or your current tab. And yes, screencasting, that's a very important digital literacy tool and probably one that all teachers and certainly would benefit students to be able to do as well. So Geek of the Week from Peggy. Jason, what do you have for us this week?
I have two. The first one is that I've mentioned this, I think, several episodes back, but I did write a brief Medium article about this. If you are a Chromebook user and you either hate your trackpad because it's one of the low-end Chromebooks and it's got a bad trackpad, or you prefer an external one, I have discovered that two things work really well with a Chromebook. The first one is that if you have one of the now somewhat rare Logitech Windows-based trackpads. They are little micro USB charged trackpads. It's called a T650. That works great with a Chromebook, and the gestures, Chrome gestures work on that. Those, unfortunately, are $300 plus new now because they're pretty rare, and a lot of Windows aficionados like them. But I've also discovered that the first generation of the Apple the Apple Magic Pad, which was the pad released, I think it was 8 or 9 years ago now. They're pretty cheap if you buy them used on eBay. And it turns out in my organization we had 3 or 4 of them sitting around in a box. But it's become my go-to carry with a Chromebook because the Chrome gestures work really well on it. So if you like a big trackpad or you're disappointed and you've got a low-end Chromebook, or if you just like an external one, that works really well. So the Magic Pad works great. And then the other thing I want to mention, part of my technology correction in my head is thinking about, obviously, there's a lot of bad actors in the world in regards to these new powerful networks and yada, yada, yada. But I think one of the ways we're going to seize back technology to the productive side of the world is by realizing and promoting when those technologies are used for good. And so Reddit is a great example of this. Reddit is, it can be a massive troll fest, especially in some of the rooms that deal with politics or ones that are kind of purposely focused on disrupting political realms. But in the last 6 weeks or so, I've not only started participating on a number of Reddit boards. I mean, my account was literally 11 years old. I logged into an old one, had to recover my password, and discovered that my Reddit age was like 11 years old. So I've had one for a long time, but I've participated in some great conversations about Chromebooks, some hobbies of mine. I check them every day, and I've started searching there first when I have a technical problem. And 4 out of 5 times in the last week when I've utilized it as a, kind of a resource, there had been a discussion that either directed me in the right direction or answered my question. And so I think one of the ways we're gonna seize back these technologies from those that sought to use them for no good is by using them for good. And so it's also a shockingly amazing trove of animal pictures and videos. So if you like a good cat photo, Reddit is your site.
I'll comment on your Apple Magic Pad. That is my favorite trackpad because it's battery operated. The new ones, you have to charge, and I don't know. There's a lot of benefits to being able to throw a couple AA batteries in. So that's a wonderful device if you can still scrounge one up on eBay or somewhere in your organization. My geeks of the week, really quick, are a website. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't used this before. DocHub. Shout out to Eric Sappington, who is our new middle division makerspace teacher and computer teacher. He's the one who shared it with me. DocHub is what I use to annotate and sign PDFs. So it's entirely web-based, working on your Chromebook or whatever kind of device you're using. Can log right in with Google. You get so many free signatures per month, and then if you want more, you can pay more. I don't end up signing that many PDFs. And so it has a neat little exchange where you'll send yourself a text message, and then you can sign on a smartphone or a tablet using a stylus if you don't happen to have a touch device, as my laptop is not touch. And then that signature gets put into your DocHub account, and then you can use that and resize it, whatever. So use that all the time, love it. And then real quickly, also a little documentary. Discovered this on the Discovery Channel's Apple TV app when I happened to just open it up. And it's called This Is AI. It is a documentary by IBM, I think sponsored primarily by them, but really, really a great dive into the world of artificial intelligence, different events that we and our students, I think, need to understand, in terms of where AI has come, as far as beating Gary Kasparov in chess and what happened with Google, with Jeopardy, and where we're going next. It's very contemporary because it talks about that latest, I think it was Watson, where it's debating, right? And I don't know if you've read up on that. We may not have had that article in the show, where they've got Watson now formulating actual debate constructive speeches. So there's no cross-examination with Watson, but they're having real live debaters. And so they've got I think a high school debate coach, and she debated in college, talking about that and the ways in which we're seeing AI continue to grow and develop. And so think about this is the world that we are in and growing into, is that doctors they can't now today read every, study that has just come out in their field. They simply can't read every single one. And so this whole idea of the augmented human mind, that we're going to be able to utilize these different tools and AIs. And yes, it could have this dystopian effect on jobs, but there's also a possibility of new jobs and other things being created.
Right.
But the doctor of the future is going to be so much more better informed and powerful because of these AIs that they're going to be able to utilize, just like a debater who's not going to be able to survey, 3 million articles in the 2 minutes of prep time that they have for their constructive speech. But the computer is going to be able to do that kind of thing. And it's pretty fascinating to see the computer being able to use humor. And of course, this is algorithmically programmed. Sure. But that kind of a development. So highly recommend that. And if you're teaching any kind of computer literacy class, and you're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and introducing students to it, it is free, and it would be a great tool or a great documentary video to show to your students. So this has been the EdTech Situation Room, episode 101. Usually we are here on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain. And we are thankful again for Peggy George to be able to join us live. Jason, where can people find you as they would like to continue to learn with you throughout the week?
I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach, and I blog for the Northwest Council for Career Education Tech Savvy Teacher blog, blog.ncc.org. And for those of you that are interested, next Tuesday, next Wednesday, August 1st, 2018, is the deadline for applying to present at the NCC conference, ncc.org, where your application is most welcome. And I am currently working on a couple of different articles. I am almost done with my 6 apps that every teacher should download to their phone article. And I'm also starting to work on staging for an article where I will be, during a busy time of my work day, I'm going to try to use a cell phone as my only computing device from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and see if I can pull that off as a productive user of tech, based on some great conversations I've had with parents and some outside folks that have contacted my organization wondering why a student couldn't do something entirely via phone. So I'll look for that, and I'm hoping to take some interesting videos about that. What about you, Wes?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter, and I'm blogging at speedofcreativity.org, although I see for some reason my domain is not coming up right now, so I will have to check my website. Isn't it fun to manage WordPress websites in today's hostile computing environment? I've also been this summer working with my wife to do some Make Media camps, and so we have published our curriculum and what we've been doing with these one-day camps on makemedia.com, and are going to be doing some of those in the fall as well. So we want to thank you for tuning in. Please follow us on Twitter at EdTechSR. And let us know if you're listening to the show. Jason and I would love to hear from you. Hey, good. My website actually did come up, so it hasn't been zapped off the internet by Russian hackers. And we'd love to hear any topics or things like that that you would like to hear us address. At some point, we have promised it for weeks. And yes, it will come someday. We will have the Chrome show. But other than that, we would love to hear other topics that you might like us to tackle in a special show. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, actually, reach out to us. We do that periodically. And until next time, we encourage you to stay safe and stay savvy.
Good night.